First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that.
Who do they get to replace him? Republicans, I believe Joe Biden is available. There was sweat on Donald Trump's lip for the last 30 minutes or so, on and off, and I think that, if anything, summarized this extraordinary evening, what might have been certainly the liveliest presidential debate of all time, at least at one end of it, because in addition to being a presidential debate, this was also that Kamala Harris press conference everybody has been asking about. She did most of the substantial talking, despite being periodically interrupted by what sounded like a drunken heckler who kept getting owned and owned and owned every time he stood up and said something ridiculous. I will point out that in addition to this being as disastrous a debate for Donald Trump as the last time we gathered was for Joe Biden, that Donald Trump's closing argument boiled down to, in essence, his threat to destroy America with Russian nuclear weapons. This did not go well for Trump. Remember when I said on the podcast shortly after the decision by Joe Biden to drop out to accede to the wishes of Democratic leadership and let Kamala Harris be the nominee, that there might someday soon come a day when we actually sit around and say, can you believe we almost didn't swap out candidates in 2024? We almost didn't run Kamala for president? Well, we're certainly at that point right now. That was an extraordinary moment from, in fact, the seconds that they came out onto the stage and the vice president extended her hand to Donald Trump for a handshake, and you could tell he didn't even know what that meant. The last time somebody shook his hand in those circumstances was 2016. Hillary Clinton did it once and would never do it again. From the beginning, she was on offense, he was on defense. In fact, after they took that first commercial break, about an agonizing 1 hour and 3 or 4 minutes into the debate tonight, I was genuinely surprised that when they came back from the commercial break, Donald Trump was still there. When your go-to character references are Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin, you're having a bad night. Because when she was not making a fool of Trump, Trump was making a fool of himself. The final rankings that I give at the end of something like this are now complete. Our number one was Kamala Harris. Finishing second, David Muir of ABC News. Number three, Lindsay Davis of ABC News. 4, the Carfax Fox on the CNN commercials during those breaks. Number 5, dogs and cats everywhere. Number 6, the ABC voiceover guy who said, welcome back to the ABC debate. Positions 7 through 4,999. No candidates rose to the standard described by the committee in the applications. And the 5,000th ranked performer tonight was Donald Trump. And if you think it's just me, and perhaps I'm exaggerating somewhat because of my own personal beliefs and my occasional reputation as a liberal or a Democrat or a progressive, Rick Wilson, who was a conservative maestro behind the scenes during the presidency and candidacies of George W. Bush and particularly John McCain, with whom I have had loud and public arguments. Rick Wilson tweeted 43 minutes into that debacle, I've been in this business a long, long, long time. Trump is being wrecked, destroyed. He's a bellowing old man yelling at clouds. Mike Murphy, who was often with Rick Wilson during these arguments that I had with him during my network days, was a little blunter. He's literally having his own Biden debate, the Republican strategist wrote. Disaster. He's giving tonight to her. On the other side of the ball, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This, I think, will be the imagery. I've already used it, and she did too. He sounds like a guy yelling at random people on 34th Street with a karaoke speaker. I didn't think he was quite that clear. And then again, if you're wondering if the reaction to this is going to be uniform, if at the end of a political debate, the result of which does not depend on any kind of objective scorekeeping or ball game being played or anything else that is even remotely numerically countable, if you're wondering if there could be a consensus that one candidate won and the other one lost, Benny Johnson who just this past week was identified as one of the people who unknowingly was receiving payments washed from Russia and the Kremlin through a company associated with Glenn Beck's Blaze, and being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a month for online videos that got ones of thousands of views a month. Benny Johnson writes, "Why do Republicans agree to debates in this format? The moderators are rigged." I don't think you could rig a moderator, but we'll let it pass. The questions are rigged. The TV executives are all friends with the Democrat on stage. Questions get leaked to them. It's all a trap designed to destroy one side. GOP does not need corporate media. I swear to God it wasn't my fault. And I added that last part. It's from the Blues Brothers. The Associated Press, which has spent the entirety of the Trump era trying not to say anything at all about Trump in a negative fashion or a positive fashion, although they've been more successful at the front than at the back of that combination. Harris maintains tone. Trump's body language morphs, by Chris Majarian. With the debate more than half over, Harris is maintaining the same even tone with which she started, but Trump's body language has morphed. He's hunched over the lectern, slashing his hand through the air to punctuate his statements. Sometimes he raises his voice. Yes, I would say sometimes he raised his voice, and then he began to sweat from the lip. Also from the AP, during the last debate, the camera often caught Biden looking aimless while Trump was speaking. Harris appears more prepared for the television format. When Trump answers questions, she watches him intently. Sometimes she smiles, shakes her head, or stares in puzzlement. Visually, she's increasing the amount of time that she's conveying a message to viewers. You're goddamned right there, Associated Press, Chris Majarian. That was the whole point. We'll go through a checklist of things that were suggested here by Tim O'Brien, a Trump baiter of some renown for Bloomberg, including this idea that she had to remember that the split screen would be on her at all times. I mentioned it, I believe, in today's podcast. One of the rules of being in television or in front of camera in any live venue is that you should assume it's always on. And even if you don't know that you're on, somebody somewhere is watching your reaction. You must, for whatever it takes, spend that hour and a half looking at that camera and not putting this finger up any orifice north of the chin. CNN, Harris campaign sees spike in donations from women, during the first hour of debate. Shouldn't have made the fates make my nose itch there. Aaron Pellish of CNN writes, in the first hour of Tuesday's presidential debate, 71% of grassroots donors to Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign were women, a campaign official told CNN. The first hour of the debate featured heated exchanges, etc. From Maggie Haberman of the New York Times. I think we all need to give Maggie a little space right now. A Harris official says Yusef Salaam, one of the Central Park Five, will be in the spin room after the debate. Oh. You may recall that when Kamala Harris brought that up, and the key difference here is in the Joe Biden performance in the first debate and Kamala Harris's performance in this debate, was that phrase. When Kamala Harris brought it up, Kamala Harris owned this debate stage. There were a lot of good questions, and I want to devote some of this conversation here to what Lindsay Davis and David Muir did for ABC, which I wish could be Xeroxed and sent to every network. But she owned it. She brought up the Central Park Five. Everything that was not brought up by the moderators, virtually everything she could have brought up, she did. And provoked things like Donald Trump explaining that this happened so long ago, along with his own fines from the government that he had to negotiate because he wouldn't rent to black people when he started in business with his father when I was like a junior in high school. I think the handshake was the thing that unsettled him from the beginning. He was expecting to come out and have something that resembled the debate against Joe Biden, this one or the ones in 2020, or even something that resembled the debates with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is and would have been, I believe, an excellent president, but she herself said she's a terrible job applicant. She's a much better employee. She does not make that consuming, controlling kind of presentation. She doesn't sell herself well in that environment. So the debates that he's had up until this point were not against the A1 possible opponent. What she did was what you would do if you were a prosecutor in a courtroom. She came roaring out of the gate. She brought up the opportunity economy. She started by basically giving everybody $6,000 to help raise their children, and every small business $50,000. And if you noticed at the beginning of this, and we will review the first few minutes, and we can start queuing that first set of clips up because I want to go through this. The first 3 minutes of this debate really told you what was going to happen thereafter. Again, she's in charge of the whole thing. She defines him, and he came out looking unconscious. So let's go back, and I want to go through a bunch of clips from this from the ABC debate. Let me do this first one first. It's about 3 minutes long, and if you do not listen to it, at least look at Trump and look at the fact that he can barely get his eyes open. This was a bad start.
Well, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that. We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because there was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. They're taking in billions of dollars from China and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. We were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago. This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon. And you see what's happening. You see what's happening with towns throughout the United States. You look at Springfield, Ohio. You look at Aurora in Colorado. They are taking over the towns. They're taking over buildings. They're going in violently. These are the people that she and Biden led into our country, and they're destroying our country. They're dangerous. They're at the highest level of criminality, and we have to get them out. We have to get them out fast. I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. I'll do it again, and even better.
We are going to get to immigration and border security during this debate, but I would like to let Vice President Harris respond on the economy here.
Well, I would love to. Let's talk about what Donald Trump left us. Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And what we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess. What we have done and what I intend to do is build on what we know are the aspirations and the hopes of the American people. But I'm going to tell you all in this debate tonight, you're going to hear from the same old tired playbook, a bunch of lies, grievances, and name-calling. What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025 that the former president intends on implementing if he were elected again. I believe very strongly that the American people want a president who understands the importance of bringing us together, knowing we have so much more in common than what separates us, and I pledge to you to be a president for all Americans.
To quote Mia Farrow from Rosemary's Baby, "What's wrong with his eyes?" Did you see that? And believe it or not, what you saw there, if you did not watch the entirety of this debate, that was the Trump highlight. It went downhill from there because he began in that sort of, and forgive me, President Biden, that kind of Biden-esque trance. Let's use a positive term like trance. That sounds exciting, doesn't it? He's in a trance. That's what it started as. This, did you know that we're already on? Did you notice that the debate had begun, Mr. Trump? Then as she successfully angered him, baited him, decked him a couple of times metaphorically, put him on defense on every one of the topics that she brought up in those opening remarks. Then he became angry Trump as the one who lost the debate to Biden in the first debate in 2020. Then he became Trump trying to look like Churchill. If you notice all the big photos that he likes, all of his many mugshots, he's doing this thing where he thinks, and he has said that he thinks he's accomplishing a look equivalent to that of Winston Churchill, the British World War II Prime Minister, who incidentally has been sullied recently by J.D. Vance's buddy Tucker Carlson, and a guest on Carlson's show, who is now saying that Winston Churchill was the cause of World War II rather than, Dolph A. Hitler Hay. And that's going to cause another rift on top of everything else. But we're getting away from the question of whether or not Donald Trump is still the Republican nominee in the morning. The thing that happened after this was something that I cheered for. The moderators fact-checked Donald Trump. I made some comments this morning on the podcast about if David Muir wanted to be Edward R. Murrow or Edward R. Muro. I said, sure, he's the Lester Holt of Dana Bash's. I apologize without reservation. And to Lindsay Davis, whose work I did not really know, I had seen her before. As I said earlier, make Xeroxes of them and send them to CNN and NBC and Fox News, like they'd know what to do with actual journalists, but to every journalistic organization in the country, how to do a debate when one of the candidates is actively lying and depending on lies, is to do what Lindsay Davis did on the subject of the 9-month abortions, to simply say, no, there are no such things in any state. It is not legal in any state. Vice President Harris, don't even give him a chance to come back and challenge your fact check. A fact is that it is immutable, and if you have it in front of you, treat it that way. It is decisive. It is a knockout. It is a stick against the guy's forehead, and Trump got that stick across his forehead repeatedly. So a standing ovation for Muir and Lindsay Davis. At one point, David Muir, in fact, not only asked Trump a tough question about January 6th, but when he veered off into the destruction of Seattle and Minneapolis, which last I heard were both still extant, when he veered off into that, he let him finish, and then he said, but to get back to January 6th, it was marvelous. It was what Jake Tapper and Dana Bash should have done and did not do, that amplified the problems that Joe Biden had in his last debate. There was so many things that you could analyze line by line this debate and what Trump did to himself and what Kamala Harris did for herself. You could probably take 7 or 8 hours and just do a simple factual recitation, just as a simple factual recitation of the problems for Joe Biden in the last debate could have been made. But I wanted to skip ahead before we go through the checklists and then some other comments, other clips from the debate itself, to the end, when pressed. And again, the moderators made sure they gave him multiple chances to answer, not simply to filibuster. He would not say he wants Ukraine to win. He would not say that he needs to see Russia defeated. He could not talk about anything in the dispute between the free world and the dictatorial world of Vladimir Putin and what Putin's goals are for Europe and for the world in its entirety. He could not process them. Either he wanted to avoid them, but I think much more likely, it simply doesn't compute with him. He immediately reverted to how much money the United States has spent in defense of Ukraine compared to how much Europe has spent. And by the way, factually, he's incorrect. Europe has spent far more defending Ukraine and sending aid to Ukraine and sending materiel to Ukraine than the United States has. We are not, in fact, being outspent by Europe on Ukraine. It's not just about the money. And if it were, he was wrong about that, too. And then, of course, there was the extraordinary gymnastics that he claimed Kamala Harris was capable of, which was of simultaneously hating Israel and the Palestinians. A series of events before this debate led me to compose a bit of a checklist, some of which I gave out on the podcast yesterday morning. And it was really an examination both of what Kamala Harris had to do and what the moderators had to do, and less about what Trump had to do, because as we know, Trump has the benefit that none of the rest of us do in those situations, where he can just make it up as he goes along. It's really good to have that asset right there in your hand. When you don't have to worry about being factually accurate, consistent, or anywhere in any way, shape, or form tethered to reality, you can tell wonderful stories. Some of the greatest compositions of mankind are based on the ability to make stuff up as you go along. William Shakespeare was great at it. William Shakespeare was not president of anything. Trump was, seeks to be again, and I think tonight he may have made it impossible for him to be, at least I hope so. But this checklist of the things that they needed to do, did the moderators or Kamala Harris do the following? Did they bring up January 6th? Yes, the moderators did. It was turned into, by Trump, an immigration answer. Did they bring up the threat to arrest political opponents? God bless him, David Muir read the entirety of Trump's post on social media in which he threatened to arrest political oppositions. Trump hemmed and hawed and gave an answer that will not gain him anything, because he neither denied the violence of what was behind his words in that post, nor did he reaffirm it. So those who were in favor of what he's proposing to do, the Mike Davises and the Project 2025 people like that, they were not reinforced whatsoever. He basically sold them down the river and tried to pivot to Harris being a danger to democracy because Joe Biden isn't the nominee, which of course was the goal of the entirety of Trump's first impeachment, was to make sure Joe Biden wouldn't be the nominee. He got his way, and now he's blaming everybody else for it. Did they bring up Tucker Carlson and J.D. Vance and Nazis and Churchill? They didn't. Okay, you missed one. Did they bring up the Arlington Cemetery scandal? They did not. I don't think it was any great loss. It's important to us. I don't know that it was important to the viewers who were not seeing, or were seeing Kamala Harris maybe for the first time, and certainly seeing the two of them together for the first time. The television audience and the streaming audience in this country for the first debate in the middle of summer was 51 million approximately. I suspect this one will be far better than that, because on top of everything else, it was goddamned better television than the first one was, and it was not. I suspect the Trump people hung in there as long as they could, assuming that at some point he would get up off the mat and throw a haymaker, which he never did. But for those in the political equation, people who would be voting for Kamala Harris, at the end of that, I'm sure you had the same feeling I had, which was, what? It's over already? Is there going to be another one next week? Come on, let's do this every week, kids. Did she call him not a liar or a criminal, but lawless? Yes, she implied that he had no law. He was a law unto himself. Did she call him old? Go for the gold. Old is gold. She never used the word. I guess she's a better person than I am, but she did imply it, and successfully. Did she call him low energy? She described the audiences leaving early from his debates. You could see his eyes flare with rage at the thought of this, because that's all that really matters to him. It is human beings as numbers. That's all he understands. It ties into the answer about Ukraine. Human beings as numbers. The enjoyment in life that he gets, perhaps one of the few enjoyments in life that doesn't come in a bag that says McDonald's on it. One of the few things he actually enjoys is those rallies. There was a point in 2016 when he said he thought maybe he would lose, but he'd continue to hold the rallies because he so enjoyed them, because people were cheering and he could count, and he could say, there were 111 billion people at my rally, and she attacked the number of people at his rallies. Oh, did he not like that? Did she call him low energy? Yes. Did she call him failure? Yes. Did she use the word weird? No. Damn. Fact checking, I mentioned this, again, hats off to Lindsay Davis and David Muir. Did she accomplish her two main goals? Did she introduce herself to the 28% who don't have enough info, according to the Ipsos New York Times poll from over the weekend, don't think they know enough about her to decide up or down? I think she did that spectacularly, and I think she did that for the people who went to bed at 9:05 p.m. and went, oh, I get it now. She's sort of a very pleasant and well-spoken, sort of standard issue, slightly more liberal maybe than I am, Democrat, but she's not going to get us all killed. Did she win over people who did not know her, as opposed to Trump's goal? Trump's goal in this had to be for him to get any higher than his his ceiling of 47% of popular support. Did he sell himself? Did he convince people who hate him to vote for him anyway? I can't imagine that the answer to the total number of people he convinced who hate him to vote for him anyway was more than 30 or 35. Not 1,000, not million, but 30 or 35. She, in the first 5 minutes of that debate, smiled, laughed at him, looked quizzically at him, mocked him, didn't say a word, paid attention, was vibrant, welcoming, has a great face for television and utilized it in all of the ways you can utilize a face on television. Hit tax deductions in the first answer, and as I said, not only brought up what she was and what she was going to say during the course of that debate, but defined him and said what he would do and how he would fall apart and how he would eventually get around to racism and sexism and to this extraordinary xenophobia that animates him in every respect. And he promptly did everything she said he was going to do. Tim O'Brien, who I mentioned earlier from Bloomberg, who issued a checklist of 7 key points for Kamala Harris: respect the split screen, or as I put it, can you maintain resting president face? A+. Emphasize you're the border czar. He sabotaged the border deal. I'm summarizing exactly what she said and early in the process. Did she, and again, he did not use the word pander, I did, pander to swing state voters with data on the economy? She sure did. She successfully did that, and she did it in each quarter hour of the clock. So if you were just joining it after watching a ball game, no matter when you joined it, you heard a number that indicated that his economy was less good than it looked, and hers, or hers and Biden's, was better than it had looked, and the one that is upcoming would be better yet. Did she manage to dodge some questions, but not most or all of them, while he continued to dodge? That's exactly what happened. He looked like he was just going to say what he damn well pleased. She managed to answer virtually every question, although her answers about Hamas and the Middle East and the war and Israel were basically boilerplate, and I'll ask you to actually see if you can remember what her conclusion was to this, other than getting the hostages out and getting a ceasefire. Not that that's a bad conclusion, but in the environment there, she did not come down on one side or another and did not explain how those things would be achieved. Did she remind them? O'Brien's last point was that Trump is in it for himself, to stay out of jail. She said Trump is in it for himself. An extraordinary performance from Kamala Harris. I don't know how it could have been much better. The closing statement was formal and presidential and a little austere, and it suffered only in comparison to the first, 90 minutes of her performance. An A+ all the way through. I'm sorry you only get an A for your closing remarks. They sounded a little rehearsed. By that point, I don't think it mattered. Let's review 5 or 6 things further that happened with videotape clips. The first of them being, it's not necessary really to listen to what Trump is saying here, but just to watch her hand on her chin and the quiet laughter. The microphones were shut off? Sure. Guess what? You can pantomime things, and Kamala Harris did that successfully tonight, too.
Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well. But when you look at what she's done to our country, and when you look at these millions and millions of people that are pouring into our country monthly, where it's, I believe, 21 million people, not the 15 that people say, and I think it's a lot higher than the 21. That's bigger than New York State pouring in.
Thank you. This just handed to me. I wanted to read you the lead from the New York Times, the holy goddamn New York Times, which, as you know, has sat out the entirety of this presidential election because nothing that happens to this country would affect the New York Times. There'll always be a New York Times, right? Right? Did I do the meme correctly? Debate live updates. Vice President Kamala Harris shook the hand of former President Donald J. Trump as she walked on stage, then spent the next 90 minutes making every effort to burrow under his skin. Wow. Associated Press again. Christie blasts Trump debate prep. This is when everybody who said, I told you so, particularly on the conservative side about Donald Trump, gets to say it again, only they'll find an audience to put them on TV. Again to the Associated Press. Whoever did debate prep for Donald Trump should be fired, Chris Christie says on ABC News. He helped prep Trump for debates in previous election cycles and is now a Trump critic. And here it is. No surprise, Trump thinks he did well during the debate. People are saying big win tonight, he posted on Truth Social, his social media site. He also complained about the moderators. I thought that was my best debate ever, especially since it was 3-on-1. Well, it was in fact 2-on-1, because clearly the goal of Kamala Harris was to destroy Donald Trump, and the goal of Donald Trump was also to destroy Donald Trump. Another clip. What was that again about the mics being off? There are mics and there are mics, and there is off and there is off.
I have been a leader on fertilization, IVF. And the other thing, you should ask, will she allow abortion in the 8th month, 9th month, 7th month?
Come on.
Okay, would you do that? Why don't you ask her that question?
Why don't you answer the question? Would you
because
veto?
Under Roe v. Wade,
Answer the question, would you veto?
you could do abortions in the 7th month, the 8th month, the 9th
That's
month,
not true.
and probably after birth. Just look at the former governor of Virginia. The governor of Virginia said, we put the baby aside and then we determine what we want to do with the baby.
President Trump, thank you.
Another this just in off Instagram, Taylor Swift. This is not the best of her many good compositions, but it will do, particularly the finish. The last part of the lyrics here is rather exciting. Like many of you, she writes, I watched the debate tonight. If you haven't already, now is a great time to do your research on the issues at hand and the stances these candidates take on the topics that matter to you the most. As a voter, I make sure to watch and read everything I can about their proposed policies and plans for this country. Recently, I was made aware that AI of me falsely endorsing Donald Trump's presidential run was posted to his site. It really conjured up my fears around AI and the dangers of spreading misinformation. It brought me to the conclusion that I need to be very transparent about my actual plans for this election as a voter. The simplest way to combat misinformation is with the truth. Do I hear screaming Swifties out there on 6th Avenue? Why, yes, I do. I will be casting my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 presidential election. I'm voting for Kamala Harris, by the way, at Kamala Harris, to direct you to her Instagram account, because she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them. I think she is a steady-handed, gifted leader, and I believe we can accomplish so much more in this country if we are led by calm and not chaos. I was so heartened and impressed by her selection of running mate Tim Walz, who has been standing up for LGBTQ+ rights, IVF, and a women's right to her own body for decades. I've done my research. She's not done yet, and I've made my choice. Your research is all yours to do, and the choice is yours to make. I also want to say, especially to first-time voters, remember that in order to vote, you have to be registered. I also find it's much easier to vote early. I'll link where to register and find early vote dates and info in my story. With love and hope, Taylor Swift, childless cat lady. So the J.D. Vance approach to things really worked well, as did whoever put out the artificial intelligence version of Taylor Swift. We can now officially declare the state of Swiftiana has gone for Kamala Harris. There was a moment in here where, as I mentioned before, Trump really lost it. As Tim O'Brien so aptly pointed out in the checklist I read before, how do you get under Donald Trump's skin? There are some easy buttons to push. As the Times put it, she was burrowing under his skin throughout. There was a moment where she accused him of being the worst thing you could accuse Trump of being. Boring.
And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
He didn't like that particularly. There's also the matter of criminality. There was an attempt of Trump, as there has been throughout the entirety of the process of correctly assessing the damage and responsibility for what he did to this country on January 6th, where he tried to enact a political version of 9/11. Since we are about an hour away from the anniversary of that solemn occasion, it's a proper analysis and a proper correlation between that and what happened in January of 2021. And it was a rather extraordinary moment when they got talking and debating the subject of criminality, and it did not go well for Trump, and I suppose that shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody.
Weaponization of the Justice Department.
Well, let's talk about extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place. The United States Supreme Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again. Understand, this is someone who has openly said he would terminate, I'm quoting, terminate the Constitution of the United States, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. Someone who has openly expressed disdain for members of our military. Understand what it would mean if Donald Trump were back in the White House with no guardrails, because certainly we know now the court won't stop him. We know J.D. Vance is not going to stop him. It's up to the American people
Vice
to
President
stop
Harris.
him.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president.
Weaponized, please.
We gotta
This is the
continue
one
here.
that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy
President
with a fake
Trump.
Russia investigation
We do have a lot
that
to get.
went nowhere.
We have a lot to get to. Lindsay?
If you'll notice that whenever Mr. Trump is particularly bothered by anything anybody else says, he refers to them as, this is the one. It's an old Mitt Romney line. I'm sure Trump will enjoy being compared to Mitt Romney when he said of Obama, this one. We know what that is, cleaned up terminology for. We know what that is. Trump didn't like what happened tonight. I don't care what he wrote on social media. He didn't like what happened tonight, and he may even have a glimmer, a vague idea of what happened tonight. He did not present what he needed to do. As crazy as the things he said in the first debate against Joe Biden were, he remained calm throughout. He didn't make a big deal about what was happening on the stage to the president. He retained a sense of calm, and as I said here, not so much. Not so much tonight. There was then an extraordinary moment in which, what were we expecting in an hour and a half long debate? 50, 60 outright fabrications and lies, all of them familiar. Well, we have a new one. We have Kamala Harris wants to take your tax money to perform transgender operations on illegal immigrants who are eating ducks.
Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns, and she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania.
Of all the things Kamala Harris said or did tonight, and anything that results from this in the polls, anything that results from this in the Taylor Swift endorsement, anything that results in this in terms of fundraising, the fact that she was able to manage for 90 minutes, almost without interruption, a look of, I'm about to burst into laughter, but I'll manage to control myself because I love the flag, is something I've never seen before in politics. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's a glimmer of what Barack Obama could do, and I saw it firsthand when I moderated a unofficially called debate. It was a candidates forum. It was a cattle call. There were still 9 Democrats running for president, and we had all but one of them out on a stage in Chicago. And every time, even when it wasn't on camera, that somebody said something about Barack Obama, he would give a little look that was just dismissive enough that you went, this is a sharp guy, without going, I don't like this guy, he's being too dismissive. She managed to walk a tightrope through that entire 90 minutes in which she looked like she was about to burst out laughing. And he, meanwhile, looked like he was about to burst out from behind the podium and take a swing at her. A clean victory for Kamala Harris. In fact, I would suggest a shutout victory for Kamala Harris. I don't think anything Trump said about her would have stuck because it was as crazy as, and I know I added the part about the ducks. He really didn't invoke ducks. He just said they want to perform transgender surgery on illegal immigrants. He really does sound like somebody who heard a newscast and then was asked to repeat it from memory while drunk and 78 years old and not quite right in the head for most of those 78 years. Lastly, I want to show you one more thing here. And again, this is whatever's being said doesn't matter. I started to notice this very early on because I have a sweaty thing here on my lip, whatever this is called, between the two halves of your lip. I know there's a technical term for it. I looked it up once. I have a mental block against it because every once in a while, when you don't see me on camera, I have to do something like this. I've had to do it since I started in television in 1981. So when I see it in others, I go, that guy's got a sweaty lip. The last 30 minutes of this debate, even with 2 commercial breaks where somebody could have come out and gone, President Trump, you have some stuff on your lips. They didn't do it. Let's see what the tape looks like on this.
But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal.
See it? You see it? Do you see it right there? Oh my God, I have nightmares where I look like that. And his went on for half an hour in front of, who knows, we'll find out, 50, 60, 70 million people. Who knows how many people saw him? And the oldest phrase of show business is the one that applied at the very end for Donald Trump. Never let them see you sweat. And everybody saw him sweat. Of all the things we've seen happen to Trump during this nightmare decade of Trump in ascendancy and then to the presidency and then as this president in exile and then this kind of late Napoleonic figure, of all the things we've seen, we've never really seen him get his comeuppance yet. I think perhaps he's going to get his comeuppance now. And lastly, it is perhaps an indicator that we got to the stage where this fight, this debate was over 6, 7 minutes in, and it was just a question of how bad it was going to be. Not unlike the one with Biden and Trump. But this was different because there was no sense of anyone potentially having sympathy for Donald Trump. This was just watching the guy get the crap beaten out of him again and again and again. And one way I knew it was coming was how quickly he actually went to, and in fact, whether he would go to at all, this weakest, dumbest, most quickly dismissed, most self-defeating of complete nightmare bullshit fantasy scenarios. The ones about the guys in Ohio eating the cats and dogs, ducks and geese, and trees going to scurry when I take you out in the Surrey. I'm sorry, I broke into Oklahoma there for a moment. In Springfield, he said, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. To which David Muir, the moderator, the principal moderator, simply said, no, they're not. We checked with the officials there. And then Trump insisted that those officials had to be lying or wrong because he saw people on TV. There is, however, still, we will never be rid of this. It's true in any population. There's always 10% of people who are functionally insane, 10% of people who are going to be racist, 10% of people who are going to be interested in only themselves. When they bind together in a grand coalition with the other people who have various grievances, we get a President Trump. We get an Adolf Hitler. We get a Napoleon, to bring him up into this again. We get any one of a dozen different Russian leaders in any one of a dozen different forms of government. But here we have this percentage of people who think that the stories of the ducks and the cats and the dogs not only are true, but somehow redound to Trump's advantage. Trump History 45 is an account on Twitter X. And they posted a meme today that might be the greatest bad meme I have ever seen. I would like to show it to you now and then offer you a few comments on this meme. I didn't want to interrupt your laughter. There it was. Put it back up for a second because I want to point something out here. First of all, you're goddamn right I'm eating that duck. That could serve a family of 300. Look at the size of that duck that he's on, or goose, or whatever it is. I don't want to make fun of this. I'm a pet lover. I'm very upset that I'm out this late at night and my dogs are home. They're worried about me, and they're also not watching the show, but that's another story between me and the dogs. He's not the man America deserves, it says. He is the man America needs. That's right, riding on a giant duck or goose while holding 6 cats. And show it one more time, and then we'll be done with the duck. Just show it one more time, because this is the best part. Well, that's good too. That's not the duck, that's me. I recognize me anywhere. That's a reminder that we're on every day with the podcast. But yes, the duck. Please, it's bad enough that this went out. And it turns out that the duck story originated from a Nazi group last month at a town hall meeting in Springfield, Ohio. That came out late this afternoon. But take a good look at the back of the duck. Please don't tell Donald Trump or Donald Duck that his ass is on fire. That's the kind of political commentary I and I alone can provide you. A couple of questions before we wrap this up in an hour, and I thank you for your attention and staying with us once again. I mean, what sort of questions could you have after this? Do you think she won by 200 points, or do you think she won by 300 points? U. Franklin writes, Keith, what do you make of Harris's non-answer on the climate? Yes, it is a threat, and yes, she's boostering fracking with her whole chest and ensuring we contribute to our ongoing nightmare in progress. I am of the opinion that we have one more period of time, one brief span, less probably than a presidential administration, to make some movement to mitigate the coming climate disaster, the one that is already underway. I have no delusions about this. It is one of the few times as I hit retirement age and my 65th birthday this year that I thought, well, hell, I'll be dead soon. It's your problem. I don't mean to be cynical about it, but that really is an option that looks almost charming in a way, that this is coming and we have one last chance to control it. Not to stop it, that's gone already. We have one last chance to control it, and that is to make sure that a guy who doesn't believe it's true and is only worried about the money that all of the means that the planet is being destroyed with only can conceive of the money and nothing else, and does not believe that any damage is being caused, we have to make sure he's not president of the United States. If Kamala Harris wants to pledge to go out and personally run fracking equipment in the middle of downtown Philadelphia, I'll applaud her, particularly if it gets her Pennsylvania. I think you need to be a little practical about this one and run with it, and we see where we go from there. Because the key climate decisions are going to be much larger than just fracking. Not that fracking's not a part of it. The whole issue of getting away from fossil fuels is much larger, and it is to be decided, I think, principally for the history of the human race between Donald Trump being president and Kamala Harris being president. So I'll take the fracking, not on a permanent basis. And by the way, she didn't say how much. There's one fracking operation in Pennsylvania, and we're operating it as a kind of old-timers day for those remaining frackers. Awakening Death has written on Twitter X. You have a fun handle. Question for KO, is the Kamala honeymoon phase over, and does the reality check internal conflict phase finally begin for the GOP? I'm guessing that you're asking whether or not the GOP will stop suggesting that this is just a honeymoon phase. I don't know what they do at this point. I really don't know what they do at this point. All of the polls, with the exception of the New York Times over the weekend, which had Trump ahead slightly, every poll since Kamala Harris became the nominee, and in fact, since the day that Joe Biden dropped out of the race, every poll has tended towards her. The growth in the swing states has always been towards her, with occasional circle backs where she moves 4 points ahead and then gives a point back. I suspect that the last set of polls where she did that 1% back after the immediate glow of the Democratic convention ended and that newness began to wear off and we got towards the colder winds of September and October. I think those reversals will be the last ones we will see because in a Democratic sense, the honeymoon is over for Kamala Harris and the post she kicked the crap out of Trump in a debate phase has just begun. Also, Taylor Swift endorsed her tonight. As Dan Patrick used to say in the old days of ESPN, go on. Thanks for being with us. A reminder once again, I'm on the podcast now 5 days a week. We will post every night because I'm an idiot. I should be retired and at home, and now I'm going to work on Sundays as well. The Monday morning ones will be short, but you can watch it on YouTube by 5 or 6 a.m. each day, and you can get it wherever you podcast each night at 12:15 a.m. EDT, except probably for this one because it's almost 12:15 a.m. EDT. I thank you for being with us. I think Trump is probably still standing somewhere glowering and making a fool out of himself, and I know I will sleep well tonight. I hope you do too. For all of us who helped produce this and get it on the air for you and the other ones we have done, I thank you, and I wish you good night and good luck.